The Mediterranean sky was heavy with clouds, almost as if nature itself sensed the tension building between two nations. On one side, Israel, proud guardian of the Iron Dome, a system hailed as one of the most successful missile defense technologies in the world. On the other, Turkey, announcing to the world its own creation, the Steel Dome, a bold declaration that it too had the power to shield its skies. This was not just a tale of technology, it was a clash of pride, ideology, and politics, a clash that raised a provocative question: is Turkey openly challenging Israel and, by extension, the entire West? More than a decade ago, Israel's Iron Dome had emerged as a savior. In 2011, when rockets poured down from Gaza, the system promised the impossible, intercepting short-range missiles mid-air before they could strike towns, schools, or marketplaces. To Israelis, it was more than a machine. It was psychological reassurance, a constant reminder that even in the dead of night, when alarms screamed and families rushed into shelters, something stood between them and destruction. To the West, the Iron Dome became a symbol of partnership, American funding, Israeli ingenuity, and the narrative of Western dominance in the Middle East. But symbols are fragile, and in Ankara, Turkey was watching carefully. For years, it had depended on NATO allies for defense systems, but under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey began charting a different course. It bought Russian S-400 missiles in defiance of Washington, an act that led to U.S. sanctions and Turkey's humiliating expulsion from the F-35 fighter jet program. That decision marked a turning point. If America would punish Turkey for asserting independence, then perhaps Turkey had no choice but to build its own shield. In August 2025, Erdogan stepped onto a brightly lit stage to unveil what he called a historic moment: the Steel Dome. With rows of armored launch vehicles standing like soldiers behind him, he declared that Turkey would no longer rely on outsiders. The system, designed for both land and sea, was to be Turkey's answer to every threat, from drones to missiles, from the skies to the coasts. The announcement struck like lightning across the region. For Israel, this was more than a new weapon. It was an intrusion into sacred ground. For years, Israel's Iron Dome had been marketed as the crown jewel of missile defense, both militarily and commercially. Billions of US dollars had gone into it, and countries looked at Israel as the only place to get such protection. Now Turkey was saying, we can do it too, and we don't need American approval. Relations between the two nations were already bitter. Once, Turkey and Israel were partners, sharing intelligence, training together, even trading weapons. But those days ended with the bloody conflicts in Gaza, the Mavi Marmara incident where Turkish activists died in a clash with Israeli forces, and Erdogan's fiery speeches branding Israel as an oppressor. By the time the Steel Dome appeared, trust had evaporated. What remained was suspicion, rivalry, and a sense of betrayal. From a technical perspective, the Iron Dome was battle-tested. It had destroyed thousands of incoming rockets, with success rates often quoted near 90%. The Steel Dome, by contrast, was untested, unproven, and cloaked in mystery. Yet in geopolitics, perception is often more important than performance. Even if the Steel Dome failed tomorrow, Turkey had already scored a victory in symbolism. It had dared to step into the same arena as Israel. Behind closed doors, Israeli officials downplayed the news, insisting that their system remained unmatched. But whispers of unease spread. What if Turkey's claims were true? What if Ankara began exporting the Steel Dome to countries that could never afford Israeli or American systems? The monopoly would shatter, and with it, the image of Israel as the region's technological fortress. Washington, too, found itself trapped. For decades, America had poured money into ensuring Israel's superiority in the region. Now, one of its own NATO allies was creating a rival shield, and doing so after cozying up to Russia and China. Punishing Turkey further risked driving it entirely into Moscow's and Beijing's arms. Going soft, however, risked enraging Israel and Greece, both of whom already saw Turkey as a growing threat. It was a dilemma with no clean exit. In Athens, officials saw the unveiling with alarm. Greece had long-standing territorial disputes with Turkey over islands and maritime borders. A Turkey protected by its own missile shield would become even more assertive, even more difficult to contain. And then there was the deeper, darker message embedded in Erdogan's words. For years, he had styled himself as a champion of Muslims, a voice for Palestinians, a leader unafraid to call out Western hypocrisy. By unveiling the steel dome, he wasn't just saying, "We can defend our own skies." He was hinting at something larger. Perhaps one day Turkey could help defend the skies of others. That possibility electrified some and terrified others. To many in the Arab and Muslim world, the image of Turkey building a shield independent of American control was a breath of fresh air. To Israel, it was an existential concern. To Washington, it was a direct threat to decades of carefully constructed dominance. The controversy, then, was never really about radar ranges or missile interception percentages. It was about identity and allegiance. The Iron Dome stood for the West, for American money and Israeli innovation. The Steel Dome stood for defiance, for a Muslim-majority nation telling the world it would no longer play by Western rules. As Erdogan raised his hand on that stage in Ankara, declaring Turkey's future secure under the Steel Dome, the message resonated far beyond the walls of the ceremony. It echoed in Jerusalem, in Washington, in Athens, in Moscow, and in Beijing. It raised questions about loyalty, about betrayal, about the shifting sands of global power. Because even if the Steel Dome fails tomorrow, even if its rockets misfire and its radars falter, Turkey has already won something far more valuable: attention. It has reminded the world that Israel is not the only player in missile defense, that America cannot dictate forever, and that NATO itself harbors rebels within its ranks. So as the Mediterranean grows more tense, as rivalries harden and alliances strain, the world must ask itself, is this just another arms race, or is it the opening chapter in a far greater struggle? The Iron Dome still reigns supreme in performance, but the Steel Dome has already conquered the battlefield of symbolism. And in the end, wars are not only fought with weapons, they are fought with perception, pride, and the power of a single message. Israel's dome was forged with American dollars and Western blessings. Turkey's dome was forged with defiance. And that is why the world now whispers, with unease and fascination alike, has Turkey just declared a challenge not only to Israel, but to the entire West?